Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really strapping in, heading straight into the engine room of 20th century poetry.
Sound intense.
It is. Our mission is basically to excavate this really dense collection of texts. They link the American and Russian literary avant-gardes directly to engineering, revolution, and, the hard reality of the modern world.
Right. So forget flowery language for a bit.
Exactly. If you thought poetry was all about, soft sentiments, well, prepare to have those assumptions really dismantled. The starting point for this whole deep dive, the philosophical anchor, if you will, is this pretty radical declaration from William Carlos Williams, American poet, also a doctor, interestingly.
Yeah, that's a key detail, the medical background.
Yeah.
Precision observation.
Right. And he wasn't just suggesting a style choice, he was asserting something almost physical about language, his big claim. A poem is a small or large machine made of words.
Bam. Just like that.
Totally mechanical, utterly unsentimental. And it forces us, really, to ask, what does it even mean for art to be functional? Like a piece of hardware.
And that question, I think, is the absolute key to understanding this whole moment globally in the early 1900s. This obsession, really, with making the poem into a concrete object or a machine. It wasn't just some intellectual game.
Bro.
No, it feels more like a survival strategy. Yeah. You had poets in the U.S., poets in Russia, grappling with these massive forces, industrialization going crazy, mass media just exploding with information, huge political changes.
Total upheaval.
Total upheaval. And the old language, romanticism, sentimentality, all that subjective stuff, it just couldn't cope. It couldn't handle the objective, often violent, fragmented reality of modern life. They needed something new.
A tougher language.
A tougher, more honest language. One that cut through the noise, found its structure in the world of, factories and engineering, not just feelings. So our journey today is going to track these really fascinating parallel paths. We'll start with Williams, obviously, and the core ideas of American objectivism, that brutal efficiency he demanded. Then we'll zoom out, look at the huge scale of things like propaganda and the city, comparing Williams's critique of architecture with the Soviet epics of someone like Vladimir Mayakovsky.
Big contrast there.
Huge. And finally, we'll dive into the really weird stuff, the search for elemental language. The Russian futurists like Khlebnikov, their American peers like Gertrude Stein, and then later the objectivists again, and the Oberiu group in Russia dealing with the crisis of the everyday.
Right.
But the core lesson, I think, across all these sources, they all wanted to make the poem a functional, concrete thing, something that could, drive desire forward and clarify the messy reality of modern perception using just words as material.
Okay, let's really unpack this machine idea. Williams sets up this almost scientific standard for art, doesn't he? With those two famous statements.
The two bold statements, yeah.
First, there's nothing sentimental about a machine. Straightforward enough.
Pretty blunt.
And second, a poem is a small or large machine made of words. And the second you accept that, the poem as machine, you instantly get this principle, efficiency. It's non-negotiable, right?
Absolutely. Think about it. Any machine, a gear, a screw, whatever, if a part is redundant, useless.
The whole thing fails, or at least it runs badly.
Exactly. Williams applied that same ruthless standard to language. Every single word, every comma, every line break has to be essential. It has to do work.
So we're moving from decoration to pure engineering.
Precisely. And that standard, that demand for efficiency, is how Williams draws the line between poetry and prose. He contrasts their functions. Our sources put it really well with this metaphor.
The ship metaphor.
Yeah. Prose, it says, may carry a load of ill-defined matters like a ship. Think about those big 19th century novels. They carry so much plot, character, setting, just a massive load. They can afford some rambling, some extra adjectives.
The ship can handle extra cargo.
Right. But poetry isn't the ship. It's the machine which drives it, pruned to a perfect economy.
Ah, okay. So prose is the comfy vehicle, poetry is the engine.
The lean, mean engine. And because it is a machine, its movement has to be intrinsic, undulant, a physical more than a literary character. It's so important.
How so?
Meaning its rhythm, its structure, comes directly from the actual natural rhythm of speech. For Williams, that meant American vernacular, how people really talked. The poem's integrity isn't based on old forms like sonnets or whatever. It's based on the nature of the language itself, functionally arranged.
No room for fancy borrowed stuff?
None at all. It has to be built from the ground up with the materials at hand.
And this focus on function, on structural integrity, It totally rejects that old romantic idea of the suffering, frustrated artist, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. When Williams talks about making poetry, he just dismisses the idea that it's some kind of evidence of frustration or neurosis.
Yeah, he links the poet's work directly to these major figures in like engineering and even war strategy. He says it's no more an evidence of frustration than is the work of Henry Kaiser or Timoshenko.
Right. Henry Kaiser, the big industrialist, mass production, shipbuilding during the war, and Timoshenko, the Soviet general, known for his systematic planning.
He's putting the poet right alongside these massive figures of industry and military power. That's quite a statement.
That analogy tells you everything, doesn't it? Creating a poem is like fighting a war or building a huge dam. It's the driving forward of desire to a complex end.
Not just self-expression.
Not at all. The poet isn't chasing some abstract notion of beauty. They're driving toward a purpose that's dictated by the materials themselves. Williams is really clear. An engineer wouldn't take gold where Babbitt metal is called for just because gold looks nicer.
You use what works for the job.
Exactly. Same for the poet. Use the right linguistic material. The goal isn't just aesthetics. It's to make clear the complexity of his perceptions in the medium given to him. The art isn't successfully showing that complexity, using the material honestly, without waste. It's about the finished object being true.
But okay, this focus on objectivity, on the machine, it leads to this really interesting paradox, doesn't it? This idea of the undiscovered language of yourself.
Yeah, that's a fascinating turn.
How does building this super efficient, unsentimental machine suddenly unlock the most intimate, almost spiritual truth about the self? Williams says this language is often avoided because finding it is shockingly revealed, and you're sort of speechless otherwise. It suggests that without the machine, without this structure, the self is just lost in noise.
I think the efficiency is the key, the solvent maybe. The old ways, the sentimental forms, they offered a kind of veil, right? A way to dress up feelings and cliches everyone recognized.
Comfortable, predictable.
Exactly. But by forcing the poet to strip away every single redundant traditional bit, by making them build that machine pruned to perfection, the only thing that can possibly be left is the raw, maybe difficult truth.
Huh. So the constraints reveal the core.
I think so. This new language, the real self, finally speaking, has to break through everything, all the outward forms, social norms, political talk, old poetic styles, all of it. It has to redress itself humbly in that which you yourself will say is the truth, the exceptional truth of ordinary people.
The extraordinary truth in the ordinary.
Right. The goal isn't some high-flown intellectual thing. It's a completely transferable, almost physical expression of a hidden dignity. It's what Williams calls a gist, puppets. Something reflecting an essential truth back from the listener. It needs to be as natural to the mind as metals are to rock.
The word itself becomes the transfer point.
Yes, for a shared objective truth grounded in the material. Okay, so if Williams started small, demanding that ruthless efficiency in the intimate machine of the lyric poem, he and his Russian contemporaries definitely shared a similar ambition, but on a much grander scale.
Right, tackling the modern city, modern politics.
Exactly. Encapsulating that whole mess through these massive, composite, often hybrid forms. And this meant the poem itself had to become a kind of monument, often one deeply influenced by mass culture, even propaganda.
The complexity they were facing was just huge, wasn't it? For Williams, it was trying to define American identity in this fragmented, post-Civil War, rapidly industrializing world.
A huge challenge.
And we see him wrestling with this really clearly in his poem, It Is a Living Quarrel, which is basically this monumental critique, but it's disguised as just a report on a visit to the U.S. Capitol.
The ultimate monument to American democracy.
Right, but Williams sees it immediately as, well, kind of a lie. He calls it a propagandistic bricolage, an awkward, embattled advertisement for America.
He really focuses on the historical confusion, doesn't he? All those Greco-Roman bits borrowed from ancient empires being slapped onto the very recent American past.
Yeah, the attempt to unify America's ideals just falls apart. Instead of synthesis, you get fragmentation.
And he achieves that sense of fragmentation through, like, structural violence on the language itself. Those line breaks he uses, they're like a scalpel.
How so?
Well, when he lists the bureaucratic titles and names, like the Honorable Michael C. Kerr, one-time Speaker of the House, the line breaks literally slice the authority. The title, meant to sound smooth and permanent, gets chopped up visually and linguistically.
Yeah.
It undermines the very power it's describing.
Ah, I see, breaking it down.
Exactly. And then he goes inside, and the historical figures are just jammed together like the meats of different animals stuffed into one sausage. It's grotesque.
So the visual history is just a mess, not harmonious at all.
Not at all. The monument that's supposed to represent unity is revealed as this jumble built on architectural lies, historical lies.
And he gets even darker, right? He connects this failure directly to, like, actual physical sacrifice.
Yeah, the really dark conclusion is that the Capitol is a jumble and wreckage, and it's built on the bodies of soldiers. He describes their corpses as sickly green.
Chilling. It's a reminder that this monument to liberty was maybe built by people who weren't free themselves, or whose unseen sacrifice is holding up this shaky structure.
And that contrast brings us right back to the title metaphor, living coral. Why coral?
Okay, yeah, why?
Because a coral reef is this massive collective monument, right?
Yeah.
But it's built by tiny individual vulnerable polyps.
Hmm.
Each one secretes a little bit of skeleton, and over generations, they build this huge, shared, living structure.
Organic, collective, growing.
Exactly. And Williams contrasts that living force with the heavy dead weight of the Capitol's stone dome, that 8 million-pound weight just straddled on top. The Capitol is dead weight. The coral is slow, shared, evolving life.
Wow. Okay, powerful contrast.
Now let's make a sharp turn. Let's go to Vladimir Mayakovsky's epic 150 Melson, written around the same time, 1920, but in revolutionary Russia.
Okay, Mayakovsky, big name.
Huge. And he shares Williams's desire to create a massive composite object, but his is totally saturated in the revolutionary aesthetic. He was also fighting old, dead forms, but specifically to mobilize the masses.
And the influence of commercial art, propaganda art, is way more explicit with Mayakovsky, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We know he was deeply involved in Soviet agitational propaganda, designing posters, writing jingles for things like Rezinotrest ads.
Those bold, graphic posters.
The Rasta windows. Exactly. They were like these sequential propaganda posters, almost proto-comics, designed for quick reading by a largely illiterate population. Bold colors, flat images, direct slogans.
It's ludicrous.
And Mayakovsky basically translated that style into poetry. His verse often acts like a call, an exhortation like a slogan. He uses this heavy, regular, accentual meter, perfect for shouting at rallies.
Designed to be functional, a tool.
A functional tool of ideological transfer, just like a good ad.
And his caricatures, especially of the enemy, the capitalists, they're on this huge, almost cartoonish scale.
Totally. He depicts Woodrow Wilson as the ultimate capitalist pig par excellence, a gigantic living monument who literally eats the labor of his workers, a city of consumption. He even takes a swipe at American icons, reducing Walt Whitman to the honored lifter of ladies' wrinkles.
Ouch. Turning this icon of American poetry into like a cheap cosmetician.
Exactly. And the poem, like all good propaganda, ends up in this stark binary war. It mirrors the simplicity of the posters. All the middle ground disappears. Only red revolution, blood and white, the old czarist capitalist order remain.
Black and white, or red and white, I guess.
Pretty much. But what's really striking, I think, is the language he uses for the masses marching into this battle. They aren't really individuals, not heroes or citizens in the usual sense. They're called millions of things, or even millions of beasts.
Things, not people.
Things. It's a radical move, and it's where he really diverges from Williams. Williams was looking for the individual polyp's truth inside the collective coral. Mayakovsky emphasizes the collective's mechanical, undifferentiated function in the revolution.
The individual gets dissolved.
Dissolved into the grand, hyperbolic, useful thing of the masses. But then, interestingly, he ends by aiming the utopian prophecy right at the individual reader, just like an ad demands you do something. It was for you, the bloody Iliad's revolutions.
So the epic poem itself is an object, a functional slogan trying to compel you to act.
Exactly. A machine for participation.
Okay, so we've seen the poem as an efficient machine with Williams and as this colossal propaganda vehicle with Mayakovsky. Now we get to maybe the most radical phase. Breaking words down to their absolute core.
Yeah, down to the building blocks, the material reality of sound, the letter itself.
But the paradox here, which you touched on, is kind of mind-bending. How do you get closer to objective reality by inventing language that sounds like nonsense, non-rational language?
Right. If language is just sound and texture, how does it communicate anything except, well, chaos?
That's the puzzle.
And it's the exact puzzle the Russian futurists, especially Velimir Khlebnikov, were obsessed with solving through zaum.
Zaum, transrational language.
Transrational, yeah. Khlebnikov didn't see regular words as clear windows onto meaning. He thought they were symbols that had totally lost touch with their material roots. He called them sound dolls or verbal toys.
Like the word sun is just a small, conventional sound, replacing the actual huge reality of the sun.
Exactly. It's a weak substitute. So Khlebnikov's big idea was to restore the word's material dignity. He argued, and this is pretty wild, that the simple bodies of language, the sounds of the alphabet, are the names of various aspects of space.
Wait, sounds are names for space.
Yeah, he genuinely thought the alphabet was a kind of short dictionary of the spatial world. Like if you grouped all the words starting with a specific consonant, say K, they would somehow relate to a particular spatial concept, maybe meeting or constraint. The sound itself was a point in space, a material body with inherent meaning.
Okay, that's a leap. So if B meant closeness or surface for him, what about a letter like M? Does it have a spatial meaning too?
That's a great way to test it. And yeah, he argued that sounds like M often relate to movement, measurement, especially like a forward measured motion. Think move, measure, meter. Even across languages, he saw patterns. The sound itself imposes a kind of physical reality.
He was searching for a universal geometry in sound.
Pretty much. He believed if we could rediscover these universal sound roots, poetry could be truly shared, truly transferable, breaking down language barriers, a universal language built from sonic matter.
Which brings us to his most famous zaum piece, right? Incantation by Laughter. Zakliati smekom.
That's the one. It's this long invocation that just obsessively takes the root word smek, meaning laughter.
And combines it with every possible prefix and suffix.
Every single one he could think of, yeah. Creating words that don't technically exist but are built from real language parts.
And this crazy construction process is key to his whole object idea.
Totally. It builds what they call verbal texture, or factura. The poem becomes like a tapestry or a textile. He makes these really intense sound clusters. Words like laughlets, forth laughingly, belly laughnick.
Sounds almost overwhelming.
It is. The sound smek repeats so much that the structure of the words, the phonetic material itself, just completely dominates any conventional meaning. You're forced to focus on the process, the building with sound. The poem is an object made by accumulating sounds, not abstract ideas.
Okay. Meanwhile, back in America, Gertrude Stein is also going for objectivity, but maybe less explosively. She moves away from describing personality rhythms to focusing intensely on specific things.
Right, a different path to a similar goal.
But how is a Stein poem about, say, a cup less subjective or sentimental than just a normal description? How does her fragmentation achieve that objectivity Khlebnikov got through sound construction?
That's a fair question. You can see her method evolve in tender buttons. Take a short early piece like Glazed Glitter. It seems to describe a specific object, maybe a porcelain gift. It's very concrete. And she uses sonic repetition. Clean, cleansing, convincing. The sounds themselves build up a kind of density, a solidity. The word's material quality helps create the object's presence.
So, similar to Khlebnikov's texture, but maybe quieter?
Sort of. But then look at a later section like roast beef. Here, the language gets much more abstract, almost frustratingly so. It breaks down into these tautologies. Anytime there is a surface, there is a surface, and every time there is an exception, there is an exception.
Right, which seems to say nothing.
Or maybe it says everything about how we perceive. The goal here, I think, is to strip language of its usual hierarchies. By using these flat, tautological phrases and abstract nouns, she makes every word seem equally important, equally weighted.
No word is more special than another.
Exactly. In this kind of non-hierarchical writing, she suggests that any difference we perceive in content or meaning isn't inherent in the object itself, but is totally contextual. It depends on how we arrange the words. What matters is the material reality of the language on the page, its surface, not the traditional meanings it's supposed to carry.
Pure surface. Unsentimental.
Pure unsentimental surface. The language as object. So this intense focus on the isolated object, whether through sound or fragmented description, leads us into the 1930s and maybe a kind of crisis point.
Okay, what happens then?
For the next wave of poets, people like the American objectivists, George Alpin especially, and the Russian Oberyu group, the whole distinction between the person, the subject, and the thing, the object, was starting to feel like it was collapsing.
Why? What was causing that?
Well, think about accelerated mass production, consumerism. The world was just filling up with stuff. Objects were everywhere, defining life. It's a phenomenon philosophers call reification. Objects start to take over human existence, human relationships.
Things become more real than people.
In a way, yeah. And in the Soviet context, this anxiety really crystallized around the concept of bite.
Bite. Everyday life.
Everyday life, but with a really negative connotation. It was seen as the stagnating slime or this tight, hard mold that just suffocated the original ideals of the revolution.
So the opposite of the grand revolutionary vision.
Exactly. The revolution aimed for Baitai true existence, freedom, higher purpose. But what people got was Bite, the mundane, relentless grind of queues, bureaucracy, boring domestic tasks. The feeling was that objects and the systems around them were winning. Alienation was setting in.
That sounds grim. Bite-eye is the sort of cultural sickness.
It's pretty bleak. And the Russian avant-garde group, Oberyu, people like Vidensky and Karms, they responded to this total absurdity of everyday life with, well, more absurdity, theatricality, nonsense.
Fighting absurdity with absurdity.
Their idea was if the material world has become illogical and absurd, then only absurd language can actually reflect it truthfully.
Which brings us to Daniel Karms, the self-proclaimed authority on nonsense. He specialized in these little anecdotes, stories that just break logic completely, right? Just to show how the object persists.
Exactly. You have that famous, maybe infamous example where the character Korodijin is killed by a cucumber.
Killed by a cucumber.
Yeah, he buys a big cucumber, puts it in his bag, walks home, slips, falls, hits his head on a stone, and dies. But the story says the cucumber killed him. He got struck on the head by the cucumber and died instantly.
Okay, that's absurd.
Totally. But here's the genius, the punchline. The conclusion, which completely ignores the human death, is simply what big cucumbers they sell in stores nowadays.
Wow, so the human tragedy just vanishes.
Vanishes. The entire moral, ethical universe dissolves. It's subsumed into this weirdly sardonic praise for agricultural production. The cucumber, the object, the commodity, it persists, it dominates the story. The human subject, the human systems of logic and grief, they're temporary, disposable.
The object outlasts the meaning we try to give it.
Precisely. The object achieves this permanent state, detached from human logic. And this idea, the object's autonomy, is really central to Vidensky's thinking, too. He saw the material thing as a kind of hieroglyph. Yeah, something perceived unnaturally or theatrically. And this object hieroglyph has two meanings happening at once. There's the inherent meaning, the physical reality, it's a cucumber, it's a chair.
Okay, the literal thing.
And then there's the extrinsic meaning, the illogical meaning that escapes our rational systems, the meaning you can only get out through metaphor or nonsense, the absurdity.
So by deliberately breaking those old causal links, cucumber hits man, man dies, therefore cucumber is weapon, Vidensky is saying.
He's saying that ultimately all things mean just one thing, versi, everything. All the old connections are canceled out by this persistent, overwhelming material reality. Logic is broken, but the object is still there, concrete and undeniable.
That's a heavy concept.
It is, and it brings us neatly back to the American side. And George Oppen, a key objectivist, he was interrogating the smallest bits of language even more relentlessly maybe than Williams.
How so? Still focused on objectivity.
Absolutely. Seeking objectivity by focusing intensely on the external world, but always maintaining this disciplined distance between the person looking and the thing being looked at.
And he also comes back to the machine metaphor, doesn't he? But maybe with a more existential spin, especially in that collection Discrete series.
Yes, exactly. Look at the poem Image of the Engine. It deliberately blurs the line between a human body and a mechanical engine.
How does it do that?
Well, the engine, when it's stopped, is described as just a machine. Inert parts, material. But when it's running, it is itself. It has this kind of temporary existence, a beingness. And the moment the engine stops, that last slow cough, that becomes the definition of mortality.
So it forces us to see the human body after death as also just a machine.
Right. The objectivists were really wrestling with that ambiguity. Is the body just a machine? Or does the machine, when it's running, have some kind of life, some kind of soul? Where does the animating force reside?
Deep questions. And this objectivist focus on material reality, on the specific object, it also becomes a way to critique the hidden workings of capitalism, right? Not just metaphysics.
Oh, absolutely. Open uses that intense focus on the small, discrete thing to reveal how the system hides labor, hides the process.
How does he do that?
The poem, Thus Hides the Parts, is a fantastic example. He talks about the prudery of Frigidaire.
The prudery of a fridge.
Yeah. The refrigerator hides its mechanical guts, right? Inside this sleek, clean, white box. It's modest about its inner workings. And Open puts that right next to the prudery of soda jerking.
Soda jerking.
The guy making your drink at the counter, he has to perform the private act of cracking eggs out of sight, hidden from the consumer.
So the fridge hides its mechanics, the worker hides his labor.
Exactly. It's a direct comment on alienation. Capitalism systematically hides the means of production, the actual work involved. Get the clean, finished product sanitized without seeing the messy origins. The Frigidaire hides the wires. The soda jerk hides the cracking eggs.
And Open uses his super terse objective language, his small nouns, to expose that concealment.
He does, and the irony, which is just brilliant, is that Open uses the very language of commodity culture to critique it. That clipped, terse pointing style near the lens in our parks. It sounds like advertising copy.
Short locational phrases,
Ugh.
like instructions or labels.
Exactly. He takes the linguistic tools of commerce and turns them into instruments of critique. It shows the poem's efficiency again, but this time as a machine for ideological analysis. Hashtag outro. So when you pull back and look at all these different movements, from Mayakovsky, the propagandist in Moscow, to Williams, the doctor poet in New Jersey, to Khlebnikov inventing sounds, to Open watching a soda jerk, what really unites them?
It seems to be this singular focus on the object ideal.
I think that's it. They somehow realized that the material object, whether it was a tiny noun, a huge building, a piece of sound, offered the only kind of honest model they could find for putting back together all the things modernity had fragmented.
Like animate versus inanimate.
Yeah, or verbal versus visual, subject versus object, all those binaries. The poem as machine, the poem as object was the mechanism they designed, or hoped to design, for that total synthesis.
And going back to that political undercurrent, it was never just about art for art's sake, was it?
Rarely, if ever. By focusing so intensely on the material, these poets were trying to dig out a language that could actually be transferable, something shared.
Whether it was Mayakovsky aiming for the language of universal revolution,
Or Williams searching for that exceptional truth of ordinary people. The goal was always to create a language that could get beyond just individual, isolated experience and become a public, durable thing. Something solid.
something objective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this whole search for material durability, for a language that lasts, it finds maybe its most powerful image in the work of the Russian poet Osip Mandelstam. Remember, his first book was called Stone.
Stone. Can't get much more material than that.
Right. His ideal for poetry wasn't some flowery stanza or a personal outpouring. It was a crystallographic figure, that is, a body. The ultimate object model for Mandelstam. Mineral rock.
Wow. Poetry is geology.
Pretty much. And Mandelstam claimed that rock isn't just an impressionistic diary of weather, a record of the past, what's happened to it. Critically, he said, it contains periodicity. It holds patterns. And it's like an Aladdin's lamp penetrating the geological twilight of future ages.
So rock connects past, present, and future through its material structure.
That was his vision. So if the poem aims to be a material body like rock, capable of collapsing time and space into itself, well, that leaves us with a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away.
Okay, let's hear it.
What geological truth is our current everyday language, now completely saturated with digital noise, data streams, instant images? What is it sedimenting for the future? What kind of rock are we building right now with our words?